Look, a fascinating speech this week by Tony Abbott in Taiwan. This was a bold move. Former Australian Prime Minister went to Taiwan to express his support and also his concern about China's increasing aggression in the region. We've seen flight incursions stepped up. What's your analysis of Tony Abbott making this trip and the power of his speech?
Well, Sharri, what struck me about Tony Abbott's trip to Taiwan and Taipei and his speech was just how different Mr. Abbott's conducting himself as a former Prime Minister compared with a couple of other Prime Ministers, both before and after him. And Mr. Abbott's gone out and he's given quite a statesmanlike speech. He's gone in a private capacity and he's drawing attention really in Australia to what is the biggest potential conflict in our region. And it's a conflict that could have serious global implications and that Australia could be sucked into. And Tony Abbott would have known that by his appearance, he was bringing its attention to more Australians than otherwise would be cognizant of this. So for me, this is a sort of fascinating insight into how he intends or how he's conducting himself as a former leader of the country, as opposed to some of the other ex-prime ministers who've been much more willing to get engaged into the nitty-gritty of politics and daily partisan debate.
I think it's also interesting that Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for a peaceful reunification with Taiwan. And this is just days after they sent 56 bombers and other aircraft, on a single day to the island. It's almost a threat that the Chinese president is giving to the world. He's saying either have a peaceful reunification, so a peaceful takeover with Taiwan, or it seems that that there have been threats, some overt in the Chinese propaganda outlets, that they will invade Taiwan. This is quite a delicate situation, and it makes it very difficult for the United States and Australia to respond. What's your view on this?
Well, Australia is in a really tough position here because we have a military alliance with the US. We're obviously part of the Western Alliance, and Taiwan is now part of that because of its close military relationship with the US. So this is not something we can easily ignore. At the same time, to state the obvious, we have a huge trading relationship with the Chinese. So one of the ironies is that we send iron ore to China, which they convert into steel and into aircraft carriers, which then are using to try and intimidate Taiwan. And we see an entire approach from the Chinese of brinkmanship and intimidation. And they want to ratchet up the pressure to the point where I think the Western Alliance will be tempted or perhaps fracture in its support for Taiwan. And so when people like Tony Abbott go there, they bolster the Western support of Taiwan, which is an incredibly successful and thriving democracy. We have 1 billion people living under, well, perhaps not tyrannical rule, but certainly not under democracy and certainly not enjoying freedoms that we consider a minimum requirement on the mainland. And then across the road, across the strait in Taiwan, you have a thriving democracy with a free press and regular changes in governments.
Yeah.
So this is a... Sorry, Sharri, go ahead.
No, of course. I was just going to say this is going to be a difficult decision about whether the United States, whether Joe Biden, whether Scott Morrison and others have the appetite to go into military conflict to defend Taiwan, particularly, I suppose, if it might not want to go into battle at the end of the day, and also whether there'd be public support for getting into some sort of war or military conflict with China over Taiwan. And this is just going to keep unfolding. It was a distant problem not so long ago, and now looking at Xi Jinping's rhetoric, it might come to a head sooner than we realise.